Having left the office, Emily saw that the weather had gotten worse. There was a strong wind, and it was clearly going to rain. She didn't have an umbrella, so she was probably going to get soaked. Having gotten out at the subway at her stop, Emily realized that she literally had to start running. She heard the thunder and saw the lightning, and it was already starting to rain. Emily covered her head with her purse. "Looks like there's a storm coming, and on the day I wore my new shoes." Emily was already near her apartment building. She ran into the front door and sighed with relief. "Thank God, I made it in time." The woman stopped in front of her door and took out her key. "Emily, dear, it's so great that I ran into you." She heard a thin female voice behind her. "Nope, didn't make it in time," flashed through Emily's head. Today's story is about the fact that some situations aren't what they seem, as well as the fact that someone's own heart sees and speaks much more than everyone around can see or say. Miss Hamilton was Emily's neighbor. She looked like a sweet old woman of short stature with gray hair, a snub nose, and small eyes. But that was pretty much all that was sweet about her. Whether it was simply in her nature or maybe it was her old age that was to blame for it. But this woman devoted all her time to spying, eavesdropping, collecting, and spreading all kinds of rumors and gossip, and oftentimes sticking her nose into other people's business. Whenever someone ran into Miss Hamilton, it was virtually impossible to get away from her. "Miss Hamilton," Emily tried to put on a friendly face, "did you want something?" The old woman caught up with Emily, grabbed her by the hand, and took her aside before whispering quietly, "Tell me, how are things between you and Anthony?" "My husband and I are doing fine, as always," Emily answered confidently and wanted to leave. But the old woman was still holding her hand. Miss Hamilton narrowed her eyes in disbelief. "You are? Strange, very strange. What's so strange about it? Why are you even asking?" Emily asked with irritation in her voice. The old woman looked around, making sure that no one was listening in on their conversation. "I hate to upset you, but..." The woman put on a look of regret and paused. "Miss Hamilton, if you have something to say, just do it." Emily yanked her hand out of her neighbor's grip. "Darling, everyone in the neighborhood is talking about your husband's affair with that woman." The old woman pointed up with her head. Emily understood who her neighbor was talking about. It was Eleanor Spencer, their neighbor from the apartment upstairs. Eleanor moved into the building a couple of years ago and opened a small spa on the next block. She was a pretty 45-year-old woman in great shape. She always had makeup on and her hair was always made up, and she dressed to impress, to put it mildly. She was a confident woman, moderately sociable and polite, at least with her neighbors. "Miss Hamilton, I think you're wrong. No one in our family has any kind of relationship with Eleanor." "I wouldn't be so sure. I know I'm old, but my eyes and ears are working fine. Look, it's up to you. My job is to warn you before it's too late," the old woman said, sounding very businesslike. "We all know what kind of woman Eleanor is." "I'll say it again, you're wrong. Take care." Emily hurried to get inside her apartment. That old gossip is back at it again, Emily thought to herself. The woman involuntarily thought back to the conflict she had with Eleanor about 6 months ago. Their 10-year-old son was riding his bicycle by their building. He fell down and scratched Eleanor's car. The woman immediately went to see Emily about it, but Emily stood up for her son and refused to accept the blame. "You parked your car 2 meters out of the parking lot. Kids ride their bikes there all the time, and your car was clearly in the way." To which Eleanor replied that she left her car there for a couple of minutes, only to bring her heavy bags into the building. Basically, their standoff ended with Eleanor's threats to call the police. However, Emily was surprised to see that Eleanor never followed through on her threat. When Emily told her husband what had happened, all he did was ask his son to be more careful in the future. That incident completely ruined the neighborly relationship between the two women. They even stopped greeting each other as they crossed paths, which they actually did their best to avoid at all times. As for Miss Hamilton's so-called benevolent warning about Anthony's alleged relationship with Eleanor, Emily didn't give it too much thought. She and her husband lived in perfect harmony, and even though they'd been married for 10 years, their relationship was still full of love and passion. The woman's heart told her that Anthony loved her and that he didn't need anyone else. Time passed. Emily was waiting for Anthony to get home from work, but he called and said that he would be a little late. He was going to meet Nick, his friend from school, at the bar for a couple of beers. Emily didn't mind her husband spending time with friends, and Nick was one of the few friends Anthony had. Moreover, he was the only person from school he stayed in touch with. Emily knew Nick very well. He was a good guy, and letting her husband hang out with him a couple of times a month didn't seem like a big deal to Emily. Anthony works so hard, trying to make sure we have everything we need. He has every right to spend some time with his friends. Nick really was one of Anthony's best friends. They were so close that Anthony could share even his most intimate secrets with him. And that day, Anthony needed his friend's advice. "Listen, do you remember our upstairs neighbor, Miss Eleanor?" Anthony asked Nick casually. "Sure, I remember her. Who could forget a woman like that?" the man answered and seemed to have gotten distracted. Nick was remembering when he once saw Eleanor getting into her car. The woman was wearing a very tight red dress, and the way her slender figure curved as she was getting behind the wheel mesmerized Nick. He was single, so he had every right to look at anyone as much as he wanted. "That was so sexy," Nick said. "What are you talking about, buddy?" Anthony was surprised. Nick shook his head, having realized that he was talking out loud. Forget it. So what's up with Eleanor?" Nick tried to stop the flow of fantasies caused by memories of the spectacular Eleanor and focus on Anthony's story. "I don't remember if I ever told you. About half a year ago, my son fell off his bike and scratched Eleanor's car. Emily got into a fight with her, and she even threatened to call the police. So I decided to try and smooth out the conflict by offering Eleanor to take care of the scratches at my shop, but I didn't tell Emily about it. In addition to removing the scratches, I also checked her car and told her about the pressing problems. She asked me to fix everything, and I did. Basically, Eleanor was so pleased with my work that she started asking me for help once in a while." "Oh, and what kind of help was it?" Nick asked, smirking. "Good God, Nick, you're an idiot. Get your mind out of the gutter. I'm talking about hammering a nail and hanging up a picture or fixing a faucet." So I agreed. It wasn't hard work, and a few extra dollars could never hurt. But recently she asked me if I could repaint the walls in her apartment and do some other work there too. She offered me a lot of money for it. And now I don't know what to do. Emily's birthday is coming up, and I would really like to get her a nice present, so some extra cash could come in handy. But knowing their relationship, I'm worried that one of our neighbors, Miss Hamilton, for example, could see me there and draw a wrong conclusion. "Dude, I'm so jealous of you. You have an in with that queen of a woman? Do you happen to need an assistant by any chance?" Nick's lips stretched out into a smile. "Lord, why am I even talking to you? You're an idiot." Anthony brushed him off. "Come on, buddy. Do what you need, earn some extra cash, and get your wife a great gift," Nick said, getting a bit more serious. Emily got a call from her friend Catherine. Knowing that the conversation would be a long one, the woman made herself a cup of coffee and settled comfortably on the couch. They didn't talk often, but when Catherine did call, it was impossible to end the conversation without discussing all the news in each of their lives, including all the gossip. "Listen, I went to your neighbor's spa recently, Eleanor Spencer's. You have no idea how great the procedures were. I walked out of there feeling 10 years younger. You should try it too." "Thanks, I'll manage without it. I look and feel great as it is." Emily didn't like hearing about Eleanor again. "Actually, that's not why I'm calling," Emily's friend said and fell silent. "Catherine, why all the drama?" "Just say what you have to say," Emily replied sharply. "Well, when I was at the spa, I saw something. Here goes. I think there's something between Eleanor and your Anthony. I saw him come into her office and spend about a half hour there. Then she walked him to the exit and said something like, 'I'll be waiting.' Listen, I believe in my husband and I trust him 100%, Emily answered firmly and decisively. I'm just telling you what I saw with my own 2 eyes, the friend insisted. Okay, Catherine, I heard you, Emily said and ended the conversation. First Miss Hamilton, now Catherine? Lord, could it be true? Doubts started creeping into Emily's head. The woman decided to check it out herself, so she followed her husband. Imagine her surprise when he got into the building, but walked past their apartment and went up to Eleanor's instead. At that moment, Emily felt as if a volcano had erupted inside her. She was boiling with anger. She was so emotional that her hands were shaking and her voice was trembling. Emily went home, took a sedative, and decided to wait for 20 minutes. Then she went to Eleanor's apartment, determined to pull out the hair of her cheating husband and his lover. Having stopped in front of Eleanor's door, Emily knocked on it. Seconds later, she heard footsteps on the other side of the door, and when it opened, Emily saw Anthony. From the expression on Emily's face, Anthony immediately understood what was happening. "Honey, this isn't what you think." People say this phrase in movies all the time, and now Anthony had to say it too. Despite the overwhelming emotions and feelings, Emily still managed to take note of the fact that her husband was dressed in work overalls all splattered with paint, and that he was holding a paintbrush in his hands. At that moment, Eleanor also came to the door. Glancing at Emily and Anthony, the woman realized that the situation could harm her reputation. "Emily, come in, please," she said to her neighbor. Emily was surprised at the invitation, but she didn't show it. She resolutely went inside, still intending to thin out the woman's beautiful hair and the rather sparse hair on her husband's head, too. However, the fight never took place. Emily's mental stability and good judgment saved the day. The woman didn't rush to use her fists, which gave Eleanor and Anthony a chance to explain everything. There was enough evidence in the apartment to support their explanation. The floors and the furniture were covered up, there were cans of paint everywhere, and part of the wall had already been painted. Anthony told his wife about the work he did on Eleanor's car, and that he was earning some extra money to get her a birthday gift. Half an hour later, all three of them were sitting in the living room, drinking coffee, and laughing about everything that had happened and everything that could have happened. Emily and Eleanor made peace. Now they had a truly friendly relationship. Of course, Emily's birthday gift wasn't a surprise anymore, but she was still very happy when Anthony gave her the gold pendant that she'd once seen in a jewelry store and liked